Hey guys, what's going on? Welcome to Your Forest. I'm Matthew Kristoff. Today I've brought on Bott. He is a writer by trade, and he's written for all kinds of magazines and a bunch of books and all kinds of different things. He's been on CBC a few times, on TV. He even told me that he was and I'm sorry if I'm not supposed to tell anybody this, Bob, but he even told me that once as a younger man, he was part of a horse-drawn traveling theater. So he's got quite the range of experience. An awesome guy. Really loved having him in. He's the type of dude that smokes a pipe. Not a whole lot of that going on. That says a certain thing about a man's character. I don't know what exactly, but he's an awesome dude. And I really like talking to him. So I brought him on. He's written a book, him along with a few other people. So his name is Robert Bott and Robert Udell. They wrote a book called Learning from the Landscape. And it's a book about FRI research, which is, it started off being a model forest. So basically the intent was for it to be a place for research to happen in a forest landscape so that we can model sustainable forest management from that forest itself. So a place to test things out and try science and move the industry forward with management. And we talked about the beginning of that, establishing the model forests, going from sustained yield to sustainable forest management. So basically looking at just the forest for the trees to the forest for all of its component parts. We talked about all kinds of different things. So the book is written kind of in segments. So each chapter can be standalone. If you're just interested in the history of behind grizzly bear research, you can look up just that chapter and you can get what you need. You don't need to read anything before or after. Just caribou, just that, or soil and water, or socio-economic problems, or just the history. It's all there. So it's. I haven't read it yet. It hasn't quite come out yet. When it does come out, I think it'll be available on the FRI research website in a PDF or something like that. So you can go to friresearch.ca, I believe, and get it there. It was a great conversation. We talked about all kinds of different stuff. So I hope you guys like it. He's a great guy. Again, I'd have him on again. Lots of experience, lots of knowledge. And as far as sponsors are concerned, same three: Green Lake Forestry, Forest Resource Improvement Association of Alberta, and Damaged Timber. Damaged Timber is an apparel company. They're giving back to the environmental sciences community. If you buy clothing from them, 10% of that goes to a scholarship, which is now up on the website. Put in Your Forest 10 at checkout, and you get 10% off. So, and you're supporting a good cause, environmental sciences, scholarships towards those students. So check them out. I think that's about it. Let's get into it. Here is myself and Bob. Let's just start off just quickly about talking about yourself, so you're a writer originally, started writing, you were born in New York, and came to Canada, studied a little bit in Canada, and then so what got you from writing to writing about environmental issues and the environmental industry?
Well, I had been as a journalist and a magazine writer, touching on forestry and environmental topics through the 70s and 80s. But my direct involvement really began when I got a commission in 1990 from the Alberta Forest Products Association to do an educational booklet about the industry.
Okay.
It ended up being a 64-page booklet called Our Growing Resource.
Okay.
And this was right in the midst of all the controversy about the Alpac mill proposal, and there had just been a lot of controversy about Daishowa. And meanwhile, on the West Coast, of course, there was these raging controversies, what became known as the War on the Woods.
Right.
War in the Woods.
Right. Based around the
Yeah.
large old growth forests and the emotions around cutting down such ancient trees and that kind of stuff.
Oh yeah, there people chaining themselves to trees and all that stuff. So it was a time of really high interest, and the industry wanted to get their story out and have something that schools could use, or teachers, especially educate teachers, so they know what they were talking about. So I visited sawmills and logging operations and learned how you make plywood and all sorts of interesting stuff.
Up to that point, what were you writing about?
Well, I mostly energy.
Okay, right.
The immediate project before that was a history of the interprovincial pipeline.
Okay.
And I was the energy editor of the Canadian Encyclopedia. And I was on CBC for a while with a business show called Business Watch.
Okay.
And just doing all sorts of magazine writing. I did several pieces about nuclear power.
Oh, nice.
And mostly related one way or another to energy. But of course, when you do that, you also get into environmental issues.
Yeah, obviously.
Oil sands, being an obvious one.
Right.
And I did a few business stories about forest companies in the 80s, but I my interest probably goes back to growing up around trees, but also in the 70s, I had a friend in BC who was a horse logger, and I'd go out in the bush with him and watch him risk his life.
Did you help him risk his life?
I stayed well back.
As you should.
He was a pretty good faller.
Oh, I imagine so.
And a terrific horseman.
Yeah.
But God, the safety issues. When I later researched the early days of horse logging at Hinton, because you know that the first almost 10 years of that operation was mostly horse logging.
Gotcha. And that was starting in
50s. Well, they started logging in, I guess, 56.
That was the first kind of forest management area in Alberta.
Yeah,
right, in Hinton. Okay.
Yeah. That was the first forest management agreement, and there was another one for another over 10 years. I think Grand Prairie was the next one.
Oh, okay.
No, it was Blue Ridge.
Right.
I think was another. But anyway, and the other boom in the 80s and early 90s was hardwoods. I mean, nobody had logged any serious amount of poplar before that. But then there was the Orient and Strand board, and then the Daishawa and Alpac pulp mills.
Right. So before that, it was mostly conifer allowances, right? No one was looking. Everyone looked at aspen as almost just a weed, right? It's in the way, get rid of it. And now it's it's the cream of the crop. Everyone's not the cream of the crop, but it's it's used as a resource just as anything should be.
We have a graph in the book showing the historic harvests in Alberta, and that line sort of goes up in increments with. From the mechanization starts in the 40s and 50s,
right?
And then you have the quotas and the mills in the 60s and 70s, and then when you start getting into the 80s, that line just starts shooting straight up. Because of the aspen harvest,
right? That virtually doubled the amount of available wood out there for people to, of course.
But anyway, 1990 was right at the center of that. And I believe that Hinton in, what was it, 88, I think, was the first Alberta forest operation to hire a full-time biologist.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So, I mean, that's before that, everything had been on sustained yield.
Just about getting the wood into the mill.
And silviculture.
Right. Make sure the wood was going to be available, but they weren't really paying attention to the other values at risk up until that point, I guess.
So making annual allowable cut real.
Right.
And ensuring that it would continue.
Right. So when do you think that people realize that looking at just sustainable yield and just because I mean, at the time they might have assumed that maybe if we take care of the trees, the rest of it will follow. Maybe, I don't know if that was the thought or if it was just a business sense or what it was. But at what point, like, what do you think was the tipping point between looking at the forest as for the trees and then looking at the forest for all its component resources and managing them together instead of individual components? You know?
Well, that had supposedly always been there in terms of especially recreational use. And the fact that in Alberta, the energy industry gets to do pretty much what it wants to do.
Shh, don't tell them that.
Or go where they want to go.
Yeah.
And in the Hinton area, especially the coal mines.
Right. They just kind of get it just get it out of the ground, heat our houses. Yeah.
Des Crosley was tremendously upset when they put a coal mine on one of his young regenerating stands.
Ugh.
And he said, "No, they should wait until the rotation.
Give it 80 years, then you can have the coal, right?
Coal will still be there."
Yeah, yeah.
But anyway, that was the period where I got involved, and that was also the period that gave birth to the model forests.
Okay.
And so
you said the monoforest?
Model forest.
Model forest. Okay.
Yeah.
Can you explain kind of the idea behind the model forest? And I mean, we'll get into it. Obviously, that's what we talk about, and that's what you talk about in the book, right?
Yeah. Well, the idea that there were going to across Canada be 10 models of sustainable forest management.
Why 10?
Well, that was just what the government was willing to spend.
Okay.
and they wanted to have one in each major ecological region.
Gotcha. So they were picking that's how that sorted out.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense.
So you have one on Vancouver Island, one in the interior BC, one in Saskatchewan, and actually there were 2 proposals in Alberta, and one was for Alpac.
Gotcha.
And the other was from Hinton.
Gotcha. Okay. So the idea of this was to try to formulate what, quote unquote, the model sustainable forest management would look like.
Well, they would be laboratories for applied science.
Ah, gotcha.
and
this is where we're going to sort out what we need to do. Okay.
Right. And they would develop the and not just in terms of forestry, but also in terms of the socio-economic aspects, the water, wildlife,
right,
biodiversity,
everything. There's so much there, right?
And climate. Mm-hmm. The climate was becoming an issue. So
even in the late '80s, they were talking about climate change,
very much so,
and the effects of fossil fuels on our environment. And it's amazing that we're still talking about that today and still nobody's paying attention, right? Like, I think it's starting to catch, people are starting to realize, but it's hard for us to envision the future, right? And people get into that argument of, natural shifting climates, and that's true, but not at this rate. And but it's interesting that it's been going on for 30 some years, or almost 30 years, and it's going on for longer than that, but we've known about it for sure for that long, and we still haven't really made any significant strides towards fixing that problem. But
the first international commitments were made at Rio de Janeiro in the Earth Summit in '92.
Oh, okay.
And that's also when a bunch of things that The reason why this program and this book all came into being really starts with the preparations for the Rio Summit in Canada.
Gotcha.
Canada in 1990 announced its Green Plan. And one component of that was sustainable forest management.
Gotcha.
And they put aside for them serious money to do applied research and on the ground what we now call adaptive management.
Right. Because at the time it was
try things and see what works.
Well, that's the thing, right? You need the freedom of knowing that you're not going to lose your shirt to try out these things that you think might work, but we're going to have growing pains. Are going to take time to sort out. So you need something like that in order to prove concept, right?
Yeah, and people were starting to recognize that there were all kinds of issues with. Just for one example, the two-pass clear cuts, that means a lot of roading.
Right.
It means you're going back in and out. And there were concerns about the wildlife impacts and so on.
Yeah.
And
still,
but anyway, this was. Oh, there was another reason for this was that both the federal and provincial governments were having a lot of budget problems.
Oh, okay.
And they were cutting back on their own research.
Oh.
As a matter of fact, Alberta pretty much abandoned its own forest research within the department by 95, and that there have been severe cutbacks starting around 1990.
Right.
So these model forests, as independent institutes, would also have more credibility with environmentalists and academics.
Of course.
And
even industry,
yeah. And industry.
Yeah.
And so it was good timing. I think somewhere we said that if FRI did not exist, someone would have to invent it.
Right.
Because, they really needed the science.
Right. And that was the beginning of FRI research, right? It was these model forests, and that was that was the induction of it. So I made it when I had David Anderson on. What did I call it? I started the intro, and for whatever reason, in my mind, at one point in my career, somebody said the Forest Research Institute, and that's what I thought FRI was. It was Forest Research. So I called it, even in the podcast, you can go back today, and I say Forest Research Institute, and I got a very polite email back saying, hey, just a heads up, we really liked the episode, but we're not the Forest Research Institute. We're FRI Research. I'm like, oh, okay. What does that stand for? What is the acronym?
It was Foothills Research Institute.
Why did I not know that? Maybe I was just screwing it up in my head. I don't know.
Well, I'll take you through the names.
So I was close anyway, so I wasn't that far off.
From 92 to 95, it was actually called the Foothills Forest.
Okay.
And then in 95, which I think coincided with when Jasper joined, Jasper National Park had been part of the evolution.
Gotcha.
They'd been participating in all the planning committees and things, but they formally joined the model forest in 95.
Gotcha.
And then, so from 95 to 2007, it was the Foothills Model Forest. Then when the federal funding ended in 2007, they decided to rename it the Foothills Research Institute. And in
It's kind of like when the government changes over. Every time the government changes over, it's like, well, I got to put my stamp on it, right? Like it's now it's called this, but it does the same thing.
And then, I've forgotten the exact year, but it was around, I think, 2015, 2013 or 2015. Anyway, they decided that Foothills Research Institute was too limiting because they were starting to do, like the grizzly bear program is all of Alberta, plus cooperates with Sweden. David Anderson's work now extends all across Western Canada and into the Northwest Territories.
Mm-hmm. That's the Healthy Landscapes.
The Healthy Landscapes program.
Right.
The water program is now province-wide. Mm-hmm. So they decided it was too limiting. Mm-hmm. And for whatever reason, decided on a lowercase f, capital R, capital I research.
Is that how it is, or is it?
Yeah, it's a lowercase f and then a capital R and a capital I.
Really? I thought it was a lowercase I. Now I need to look it up. Why am I thinking that? Okay. Yeah. For whatever reason. So there was no real, so you don't even know why. That's just what they went with. Okay. Cool.
Yeah.
Anyways, it's an important institution that's doing a lot of good research and
well, they've conducted almost $100 million worth of research,
right.
And a lot of that was very leveraged because it was done with universities or the Canadian Forest Service or whatever. Mm-hmm. So the net value of probably much greater.
Right. Oh, for sure. When you think about the knowledge that's spread around the landscape and the applications that it's had on everyday forest management, it's I'm sure you can't even begin to count it, right? Yeah. But so to explain FRI, I guess it is a research institute dedicated to furthering forest resources being all forest resources and sustainability, I guess.
Yeah, sustainable forest management,
right.
Which has the 6 components, and those are our 6 big chapters.
Let's get into it.
Yeah.
What are they?
Well, the biodiversity, mm-hmm. The forest productivity,
okay.
Water and fish, climate, social and economic. There's 2 aspects of that. There's the social and economic impacts, and then the what's called social responsibility, which is includes things like getting the knowledge out and sharing it. And in Canada, especially these days, is the whole Indigenous aspect, respecting and consulting and working with Indigenous people.
Yeah, of course.
So Bob Udell and I, for the 25th anniversary, which was actually last year,
of FRI?
Yeah.
Right.
We're asked to do a 25-year book.
Gotcha. And so just last year you started this?
No, we started 2 years before that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And actually, Bob has been working on the history of the Institute and, what's now West Fraser Hinton, for 30 years, I guess.
Right.
But, he was the management forester, and I had a number of different titles.
I'm sure. You've been around as long as he has. Yeah, you jump around a bit.
And he retired from, I guess by then West Fraser in 2005, I think.
Okay.
But then continued his involvement with the Institute until, this program. Really, he conceived the forest history program back in 1997.
Gotcha.
and that has produced, well, one book, The Learning from the Forest, which was essentially the
Right up there.
the history of the Hinton Forest Management Area.
Yeah.
And
Remind me to get your autograph after ours.
and Peter Murphy's, well, did quite a few projects, but the best one is called Hard Road to Travel, which is essentially a history of the Upper Athabasca.
Oh, okay. Yeah, he's been around since the beginning. It seems like. Hey, he started the. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe he started the U of A program, and he started
the Forest Technology School.
And the Forest Technology School, yeah.
Yeah,
right.
He was when it was in Kananaskis before it even moved to Hinton.
Right. Yeah. No, and he's and just been involved in everything. Right. The knowledge there is insane.
But anyway, and of course, I worked with Peter and Bob on that book, and I had also been doing other work for Weldwood in the 90s. I did several corporate environmental reports for them, and continued doing work for the AFPA on things like the Forest Care Code of Practice,
right? Alberta Forest Products Association.
Yeah.
And
the and then in 2000, I started doing a lot of work for Alpac, which I'm still doing.
So you got into writing about forestry in the 90s, and then you never left. Just stuck around.
Well, for a long time, it was sort of co-equal with energy and my activities. But then
it's a lot of the same discussions around, around water protection and fish habitat and biodiversity, everything, right? Like there's the same climate, all that kind of stuff for sure. There's no doubt. Yeah, it's I'm excited to read it. I can't say that I've fully read through the Learning from the Forest book. I've thumbed through it a number of times, right? And there's always interesting things in there. And so I'm looking forward to reading this one. So this one, Learning from the Landscape, right? That's what you call it?
Yeah.
So that one is specifically about the history of FRI and the work that's been done. That's the idea?
Yes.
Right.
And that's what most of the contents are about. But we also chapter 1 and parts of most of the other chapters include the historical context.
Ah, gotcha. Always important to paint the picture correctly, right?
Yeah. Going back, probably to the last ice age, but
well, that makes sense. Got to start somewhere.
Or the whatever Crown proclamations in the
the beginning
established the Crown forests, because Canada did end up with quite different forest tenure than the U.S. because of the continuing the colonial.
Well, and the United States I don't know. I don't know about their situation down there. From what it sounds like to me, it sounds like it's a lot of the forest tenure is from private land. It sounds like, whereas up here it's almost exclusively public land that we're managing. So it's a totally different set of rules and economics and everything else that goes into it, right? Like I don't even know how to explain the difference, but yeah.
So little more similar in parts of the Pacific Northwest, but
gotcha.
That's generally true,
right?
But anyway, in terms of the story, what we did was we made the first two chapters about the institution, in terms of what led up to the creation, and then how it evolved. With an emphasis on things like the finance, the funding, the management, the development of the different programs, the different leaders, and I should say, the key thing in there is the federal government did $1 million a year for the first 5 years. $500,000 a year for the next 10, And that was so their priorities dominated, especially during the first 5, as you might guess.
Right. This is putting money into FRI. You mean?
Yeah.
Okay. Gotcha.
FRI and the other model forests.
Right. Okay.
And most of the others, by the way, sort of dwindled away after the federal funding ended.
I see. Okay.
Not all, but most.
Right. That's unfortunate.
But what made a big difference at Hinton was the program called FRIP, which you may be familiar with, the Forest Resources Improvement Program.
That's where I get paid.
Which was 94, which set aside funds to ensure the forestry was done properly in Alberta. And then in 97, FRIA to administer FRIP and have an independent board directing those funds.
It's a great organization. I mean, that's part of the reason that this podcast exists. Period. Right? It's just because I can justify it that way. Right? Because it's not just for timber allowances. It's for anything to do with forest management. So it's awesome.
Yeah, practically the reason you exist.
It is totally. Yeah.
I mean, your dad probably benefited too.
Oh, and my mom. Both of them are foresters, right? So it's
but in 97, a lot of money became available through FRIA and directly from the government.
Right.
Because we got a big rebate when the last softwood lumber agreement was reached.
Okay.
They had been putting, I guess, the funds in escrow or something, and they got all released in 97.
Okay.
So that was a huge infusion of funding,
right.
And then that has continued. FRIA has continued to be a major source of FRI funding.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
That's the largest source,
right?
And then industry and government
on top of that,
have all contributed. But I was, and that was mostly Cliff Henderson's doing.
Okay.
Have you?
I don't think so. No.
Well, Cliff was the assistant deputy minister.
Okay.
During that period, and he saw the benefit and the necessity,
right,
of having this arm's length, high quality applied research.
Oh, for sure. I mean, even everybody in the province and across Canada today, right, benefited from this. If you spend time recreating in the woods or fishing or your job in the energy sector or whatever, right, like you benefit from this kind of research because it's affecting your everyday life. Yeah, for sure.
The I think we touched a little bit on that the forests were already becoming multiple use,
right?
But I think with the expansion that occurred on the forestry side in the late 80s, early 90s, plus the continued development of the energy sector, really put pressure. Oh, and recreational uses and environmental concerns, which kind of came to a head initially on the issue of grizzly bears.
Okay.
And that became one of the premier programs.
Something about grizzly bears and caribou that people just love, right? They're on board. If the grizzly bear was the shrew or something like that, I don't think it would have gotten as much publicity, right? Like it's everywhere. It's just, but those charismatic megafauna, it's important. They bring people into these issues, right? So if that's what it takes, I'm all for it.
There's one woman out in at the institute whose specialty is the long-toed salamander.
Right. I never imagine
Yeah.
that there's a ton of people, unfortunately, it's for whatever reason, right? They just...
But her full-time job is with the grizzly bear program.
Oh, okay, there you go. See, yeah. Right? There's just something attractive about, 800-pound muscles with teeth.
Well, and that's also been, I think, more of a good news story.
Yeah.
In terms of certainly industrial impacts. I
Right.
mean, the biggest problem is poachers.
Well, because you touch on that in the book,
Yeah.
right? Like the
Oh,
grizzly
yeah.
bear's a whole chapter in here, right?
Oh, yeah.
And caribou's a whole chapter, and
Yeah.
so like I said, I'm excited to read that because I have my own ideas of what's going on with grizzly bears and caribou in the province, but I'd like to hear what you and Bob think about this. It was just the two of you, right? Just Bob
Yeah.
and Bob.
Yeah, which got confusing.
Yeah, Bob squared.
We use our initials.
Even in the emails I was
Yeah,
sending
yeah.
back and forth with you guys, I was like, I found myself using full names just in case.
Bob U and Bob B.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway,
Yeah, let's talk about what was your? Talking about the grizzly bears in the province, right? You were saying it's a good news story. So fill us in on that a little bit because I think people are probably left hanging, going, "What do you mean?"
Well, okay. The grizzly bears became an issue around the Cheviot mine. Was a very controversial proposal in the late '90s because it was right on the border of Jasper Park.
Okay.
And a lot of the focus was on what this would do to the grizzly bears.
That from public outcry kind of thing.
Yeah. And it turned out that most of the knowledge that we had about grizzly bear behavior was either from the Banff area of Steve Herrero or from researchers in Montana. Nobody really had a good handle on the behavior or ecology or anything else in the more northern foothills.
Gotcha.
Or in the province as a whole.
Right.
Nobody had any idea even how many there were.
Well, still,
It's still a controversial.
Yeah, there's still to this day. There's a woman I'm hoping to have on soon regarding the bears around the Peace region, right? And because no studies have been done up there either, even to this day. So it's
I think Gord Stenhouse, who's been the leader of this program, Gord was actually working as a biologist for Weldwood, but he had earlier in his career done polar bear research.
Oh, nice.
Up in the Northwest Territories.
Another charismatic megafauna, right?
So he was volunteered actually to lead the initial grizzly bear program,
right?
And with no certainty that he would still have a job. I think it was initially a 1-year contract.
Gotcha.
It's turned into an entire career for him,
right?
And and it's a hugely successful program. They both in terms of the applied science and learning the management issues and how to address them, and the some big technological advances just in monitoring. You used to have to go out with a radio antenna to find them, to even get any
for the callers
data, and
right.
then they had the better callers where you could fly over and download the data.
Right. And nowadays, I think it's probably just through satellite, right?
The latest ones, yeah.
Yeah, you can just go on, get in your office, log on, and go, okay, there's Grizzly Bear 1, there's Grizzly Bear 2, there's Grizzly Bear 3, and it's definitely makes a difference for management.
And some of them actually have cameras so you can see what they're seeing. And,
that's cool, because I've seen the cameras on the woodland caribou. There's a few, I don't know where this was, if this was in Alberta or what, but they had cameras on the woodland caribou, and it's just fascinating seeing things from their angle and seeing what they're eating and seeing what they're doing and how much time they spend as a group or individually, and just it's really cool. Yeah.
So the grizzly bear program just became sort of an entity unto itself, and accounts for close to a quarter of the institute's entire spending.
Really?
Since the beginning.
So what's the word? Are they doing all right?
Poaching is the variable,
right?
And some of them seem to coexist with industrial activity fine.
Okay.
Bigger problem is that when there's industrial activity, there's access, and that means poachers.
Yeah, I wonder with the poachers, like, do you think that these are people that are shooting something because they think it's a black bear, or do you think it's some, like, you know what I mean? Because there's poaching, like there's the intention of going out and poaching something that you know is illegal, and then there's the hunters who are not doing their due diligence and making sure that it's the right animal, right? I mean, people don't get shot out hunting because, you know, the hunter's paying attention, right? Like, it's not like they're trying to kill somebody, it's just they're being stupid and not. So I wonder how much of the poaching is actually intentional harvest of a grizzly bear, or how much of it is just complete incompetence. You know,
I think it can be both, and then there's also the hunters and others who have bad practices that end up, and they either are being threatened or think they're being threatened, and they shoot one that's coming after their sheep or whatever. But
right,
you should get Gord on to
Gord
Stenhouse.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah.
He could answer your question far better than I.
Yeah, that's an interesting topic, right? Because there's a lot of weird. I mean, I'm trying to imagine if I had a grizzly bear running at me, whether it was a false charge or not. I mean, that's. I don't know what. Yeah.
Well, the thing that comes out talking to him is how individual they are.
Oh, they're
and you know, some of them. He was talking about traps, and how some of them will just stand there in the trap, and others will just rage for hours.
Yeah, kind of like people, right? There's variability. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, they're a fascinating creature, and
and you know, some are vegetarians, some are carnivores.
Yeah. Oh yeah. No, for sure.
The caribou is a much more problematic story.
The caribou is entirely problematic. Yeah,
and it's, you know,
there's so many angles to it.
Well, and it's complicated because it's the predation, and as well as to some extent loss of habitat, but it's more I think the predation, and
that seems to be the common consensus amongst, you know, researchers, is that the caribou decline in caribou has to do with opening up of, you know, linear lines in the forest, allowing wolves the opportunity to predate, right? And it's interesting too, because I mean, even myself personally, I've been out moose hunting, and I know that there's a moose in this one section of bush, right? Because I saw its tracks go in there that morning of fresh snow, and you go around kind of trying to see if it came out of that bush or not, and you see that all four sides on the cut lines, all four sides of that bush have been scouted by wolves, right? And you know that they're doing the same thing I'm doing. Like, they're like, so opening up those lines like that, without a doubt, it definitely increases their potential for, you know, for a kill and for you know. Okay,
now, well, how does that account for the decline in Banff and Jasper?
Right, and I don't know, but that seems to be the consensus, right? Is that it brings in other other predated on species like white-tailed deer and that kind of stuff. But anyways, it's a whole crazy argument, right?
I think climate and white-tailed deer is probably a bigger factor.
Right. Basically, the idea, I'll just explain it for people that don't know, is that it's you open up those lines, white-tailed deer tend to move into the area where they haven't previously been, and with the white-tailed deer come the wolves, and the caribou are around, so they also get predated on, and that's kind of the gist of it, I guess.
And it's climate.
Right.
We have less snow in winter, so the deer are moving further north.
Right.
There was a good paper done at the U of A. I guess it was about 8 years ago, tracing the white-tailed deer movements with climate.
No, for sure.
And a very good correlation.
It's moved drastically. Yeah.
In the parks, the only partial explanation is that the cross-country ski tracks might be also improving wolf mobility, but that might be true in some areas, but it certainly wouldn't account for the general decline and northern migration.
It's interesting to think about, and this may be heresy, but I'm going to say it anyways. It's interesting to think about the caribou in that fashion, and that there's all these pressures being put on them, which is true. And I've never heard anybody say that, these animals are pretty poorly adapted, right? And they're kind of stupid. They're not known as, you know what I mean? They don't have a great strategy for survival based on, for the current situation. Obviously, in the past, they must have had a great strategy for survival, but things have changed drastically, and they haven't been able to catch up in one way or another. But I just every time I turn around, I can't see a solution to this problem. It just seems like there's just so many angles to it, right? And everybody's got an opinion, and I have thoughts on the issue, but I don't really have an opinion because I don't know enough about it. It's just it's too complicated, it's too complex. Yeah.
But we're indulging in one form of biodiversity, which is the fine filter, looking at individual species. And that was the way the biodiversity program began. Was looking at habitat suitability indices and making sure that there was enough habitat for all the different species. But eventually you go crazy because there were almost 300 species in the foothills boreal forest. And you can imagine trying to set up an inventory program. They settled on about 30 being representative. But even then, when you try to put them into a management program, all you can do is pretty much is spot check.
That's the thing, right? Like I when I spoke with David Anderson about it as well, I asked him a question regarding how do we take. So we have the sustainable forest management approach, right? This ecosystem-based management approach where we are managing not just the timber for its sustainable value, but also for the water and the recreation and the economic and the social and the habitat and all that, right? And I asked him, and I don't know if I got it, it's an impossible question to answer, but I asked him, how do we go about creating some kind of decision matrix, right, that allows us to go, okay, in this situation, the eagle's nest is more important than the timber, but the fish is more important, or whatever. You know what I mean? Like, there's so many different variables to this question. So should we harvest the timber? Should we improve this? Should we remove more deer? Should we whatever? There's a million ways to go about it. And I mean, I think that's the ultimate goal, right? Is to have some kind of decision matrix where you can plug these variables in, whether it's mentally or an actual tool you can use to try and make the most sustainable decision over time. Because how do you talk to a grizzly bear biologist and they're going to say that grizzly bear is the most important, or you talk to a caribou biologist and they might say the same thing, or a timber operator might say, well, if you manage the timber, you're going to manage for everything else, and everyone's got their different values that weighs in, right? So I don't even know where to begin, right? Like, it's such a complicated issue.
Well, that was why the other essentially parallel program developed, which was the Natural Disturbance Program, now known as Healthy Landscapes.
Okay.
And or ecosystem-based management.
Right.
And probably 5 other names. But
right. In my mind, that's the big one, right? That's like the mother research where all the other research kind of fits into, right?
Well, the coarse filter, as you know, is the theory is that if you maintain the forest cover and other variables within their natural range of variability, especially age class distribution being the simplest.
Right.
And that was one that the nice thing about that is we have good data on it back to at least to the 50s. Yeah.
Right.
I mean, the first phase 1 inventory was done in, I think, 48 or 49.
Okay.
So
yeah, back there,
yeah,
flying with aerial photography and tracing out where the stuff is, right? Just a crude version of what I do day to day here in Greenland. But yeah, it's that's what I mean. Like that was the coarse filter approach towards sustainable forest management, and I think it was a good place to start. And it's interesting to see how much more detail's gone into every little aspect of it now, and to try to weight those values against one another. Right, it's interesting to see.
But the way they started out was taking the 30 representative species and figuring out what the habitat qualities were for them in terms of age and site characteristics, and then essentially making sure that there was enough of that. But as I say, that was a really good check that we weren't getting way out of line on anyone, or when you saw that you weren't getting enough squirrel habitat or whatever.
Yeah,
you could adjust your plans appropriately.
So what do they? So they use the phase 1 inventory in the 50s as a baseline for that.
Well, that was the first.
Okay.
By the 80s, we were up to what, phase 3? I think.
Phase 3.
Yeah.
So that. So if that was the
so
baseline,
you had good age class data, and
so do you think at that point, do they think it was more quote unquote like a natural age distribution, not quite as heavily managed of a forest? Like, do you think that most of the forest was still relatively untouched by commercial logging at that point?
Well, yeah. I mean,
I'm just wondering, like, you know what I mean? If we're using the 50s as a baseline for what should exist, is that representative of what, let's say, would exist naturally without our interference, right?
Well, and Anderson's probably a better person to answer that, because they also used other data, not just inventory data.
No,
but
of course,
they also had, fire histories going back to the 1870s.
Gotcha.
One kind of history, but then other history, tree ring work, a lot of tree ring work,
right.
Both at the Institute and at the Forest Service, Canadian Forest Service.
That's fascinating work. The dendrochronology.
Yeah.
Being able to count the rings in a tree and see when it went through a drought, or it went through a really wet period, or there was a burn, or there was a infestation, or like it's amazing that you can read all that, right? It's
and so you could also often trace a history back 1,000 years.
Yeah, just
with dendrochronology, and then lake sediments.
Right.
So they're starting to get a pretty good picture of the historic range of variability.
For sure.
Of course, the unknown is whether climate change means that we're going to have a new range of variability.
I think that the needle's always moving, right?
Yeah.
And I think most people would agree with me that needle's always moving, and that the baseline that we think we have is constantly shifting. And I don't know, who knows what it is, right? I mean, you talk to Rick Arthur, what's his project again?
The
Mountain Legacy.
Yeah.
Mountain Legacy project, right? And he'll show you pictures from 1909 of the same basin today, and you look at the complete and utter difference as far as where trees are and where grassland is and how it's now it's all treed, whereas back then it was mostly grassland with like spotted of trees, right? And we think that the whole forest should be covered in trees all the time. It seems like, you know what I mean, with increased amount of with more fire in the landscape, you had more likely more grazing, more all kinds of other different types of habitat, right? So it's just interesting, and I'm not saying either one is wrong or right. It's just that was the snapshot in time we had then compared to now. It's different. So what's that's the impossible question, right? Like what is right, what is natural, what is all that kind of stuff, right? It gets infinitely wild to consider.
The model forest supported that initial program that was by the University of Alberta in late 90s.
The Legacy Project. Legacy Project, yeah.
The MP Bridgeland
right.
was the surveyor who did the most of that photography.
Oh, okay.
Lugging his big camera up to the top of every peak in Jasper.
Oh, and thank God he did it. Like, if you look at you go on the Mountain Legacy website, the Mountain Legacy Project website now, and you can look at some of these comparisons, and there's even photos of missing mountains from coal mines and stuff, right? And you hear reports of people talking about the hill they used to run up with the town on a certain day every year, and you go, what hill? Right? Like it's fascinating to see the impact we've had on our own landscape, right? Yeah, it's wild.
So biodiversity was one big focus of the model forest and FRI, and also of the book.
Yeah,
it's our biggest chapter, and we looked at both the fine filter, the species specific aspects, you used the right word, charismatic fauna.
Yeah, exactly. I like to use that
word.
That's one of my favorites.
And also harlequin duck, the charismatic bird.
Charismatic bird, yeah. Charismatic waterfowl. Right. And I'm excited to read it because there's so much information in there. And like you said, each chapter, you were telling me earlier, each chapter can kind of be taken on its own, right? You can read it individually and you can get the full context of the issue. So if someone's interested in just the biodiversity part, they can just read that part, or just the forest productivity part, they can read just that part, or just the caribou, or just the whatever, right? It's a great way to put these type of things together because it makes it easy for people, right, to kind of grasp the idea behind whatever their interest lies.
Now, of all of that, the one that's had the most, well, I guess it's arguable, but I think the program that's had the most operational impact, well, Healthy Landscapes, really getting aggregated harvests and getting away from two-pass.
A two-pass cut block system,
yeah. That's a huge impact. Matter of fact, the picture on our cover, the one at the top, is an aggregated harvest.
Is that what it is? So the idea there was that they would go in once and remove some of the timber, and then come in again a little while later and remove the rest of it. Right?
Yeah. The two pass was usually about almost a 20-year interval.
Gotcha.
And you were keeping roads open, and it was. Whereas this, they go in and they're leaving a lot of structure, but also doing, in some cases, what would be considered large cuts. But then you go in, you replant it, and go.
Yeah. And it's more representative of a fire, I think, right?
Yeah. Well, that's the whole idea.
Yeah, exactly.
Is those patterns. But the other we haven't really mentioned is all the fishery and water research that went on,
Oh, sure.
which led to the creation of the Foothill Stream Crossing Partnership,
Oh, okay.
which is now, it became the basis for the Alberta government directive province-wide, that you have to monitor and remediate all of your water crossings.
Right. So you need to make sure that those water crossings aren't affecting fish movability and the sedimentation, erosion in there, and
And that grew directly out of the work of the Model Forest and FRI.
That's huge, because that's a big. I mean, I'm having someone on next week. We're going to talk about the Arctic grayling and brown trout in the province, right? And Arctic grayling are one that I know have been severely affected by improper water crossings, right? Like, I mean, they've lost range all throughout Alberta because of hanging culverts and stuff like that, and it's just sad to hear. So that's the fact that one came in has made a huge difference, I'm sure.
So that organization is now run out of the Institute.
Okay.
That's one of several. There's the FGROW, the Forest Growth Organization in Western Canada, which includes things like tree improvement and growth and yield.
Right.
That's grew out of the forestry program, and eventually, went province-wide and then Western Canada-wide.
Yeah. Oh, for sure.
So that grew out of initially Hinton had done all this pioneering work on lodgepole.
Gotcha.
Growth and yield.
Yeah.
But for somewhat selfish reasons, because, they wanted to increase their AAC, so they had to show that the regenerated stands were growing faster.
Yeah, it's all part of the science, right? It's all part of the science. Yeah. So we're coming up on an hour here already. So some finishing thoughts regarding the book, regarding why people should be interested, and kind of maybe some of the interesting stuff that's going on.
Well, we've, as you say, we've tried to make each chapter standalone, and many of the subsections. We haven't even mentioned things like the educational aspect. There was an attempt at an Indigenous involvement program, but the Hinton area doesn't have large. Most of the Indigenous people there are Métis rather than First Nations.
Gotcha.
And so it was complicated, and there was changes in government policy, so that never got off the ground. I'd say that's the one omission.
Yeah.
But all the other aspects of forest management, including climate, the early work measured things like sequestration,
carbon sequestration.
Yeah.
So actually, pulling carbon from the air and putting it into the soil. Yeah.
That's when they thought that they could sell credits.
Right. I remember that. Yeah.
But it's interesting. It's after 2000, fires become such a big factor that people realized that there are just too many uncertainties to use.
Oh, yeah. And with the climate change aspect, the fires becoming more common and more, you know what I mean? There's a million factors to that, too.
The other thing that unfortunately was dropped when the federal funding ended was a lot of socioeconomic research. Everything from the reasons why people go camping and hunting to the impact of forestry and mining on those communities, the things like drug use and crime, and there was a huge amount of socioeconomic research done, which is now in the literature, is widely cited.
Right.
But there wasn't enough industry support.
That's unfortunate.
Do you
think that's going to come back?
Well, I think what's happened is it's now happens mostly in the universities.
That's what I was thinking too. Is like I think even when I was in university, there was a lot of economics, right, and a lot of it was talking about those kind of issues.
Yeah,
they're fascinating issues, and it's unfortunate that was dropped. I wonder if FRI might bring it back at some point.
Well, they've tried to integrate it into certainly some of the. Well, Anderson is doing a lot of. He's got John Parker from the U of A, basically trying to figure out the sociology of how you sell healthy landscapes.
Yep.
Because a lot of people buy it in principle, and then when it's you try to apply it in their neighborhood.
No, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
it's not in my backyard, right?
Yeah,
it's always that. Even me, I think about where I grew up in Slave Lake in my parents' backyard, where I did most of my hunting for white-tailed deer and moose, and I think about when they came through and they cut a bunch of that. Right, my initial thought when I was only 12 or 13 years old or something like that. It was like, oh my God, like, and then my parents had to sit me down and go, no, this isn't, and they're right. It didn't affect it at all. It just changed it for a little while, but there's still all those animals are there and a lot of them are thriving, and but it's that fear. I mean, I had someone on from the Alberta Hiking Association a little while back, and just openly asked him what his opinion was about the forest industry in general, right? And he's discussed the wildfires being an issue, but also being an important factor, right? And then he also mentioned cut blocks as being really sad, right? And it's because it's on the hiking trails that he loves, and you know what I mean, those types of areas. And unfortunately, if those areas aren't cut, they're eventually going to burn regardless. They're going to change. Those trees don't stay the same forever, right? Like, it's a cyclic system, just like everything else. So it goes from young to old and then dies, and young to old and then dies, and it's regardless of whether it's harvested or burnt by a fire. You know what I mean? It's going to happen. So that's the eternal struggle, right? To try and convince the public that harvesting trees is not bad, especially when it's the only truly sustainable resource we have for building material, right?
And also prescribed burning.
Yep.
In the national parks, they've done, but when there was a design for a ecosystem-based management program that included Wilmore, and the idea was that the part in Wilmore would be a prescribed burn. Mm-hmm. No way, the province wouldn't do it.
Yeah, it's too much. There's too much social value there, I guess, right, in people's minds. Emotional value, really. The
feds are a little more courageous on that front, but maybe that's because they're further away.
Yeah, they're not hearing the screams and shouts. Yeah.
We identified a couple of interesting conflicts. One is between peer-reviewed publication and getting stuff out to practitioners. The industry people who support the institute tend mostly to want to get stuff right out to the practitioners,
right?
Whereas the more academic and some of the government people tend to want peer-reviewed, which is slower. And I don't know if you've read some of those papers. 90% is methodology.
The intention of this podcast originally, I wanted to learn about research without the dullness of reading a scientific paper, because it's exhausting. It is. Like, the information is good, but it's so specific and so they're well written in an exact sense, but not in a engaging sense. You know what I mean? It's so that was the original purpose of this. So I totally know what you mean.
So the early days and up until maybe 2005 or so, they did a lot of what were called quick notes, which were essentially bulletins to practitioners.
Right.
Hey, here's something you can do in your next forest management plan or your next cut block.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, for sure. And that's what people want. They just want the quick, what do I need to do? What do I need to know, right? They want a page or two they can read and go, or even better, a minute and a half long YouTube video.
But then there was a trend towards peer-reviewed publications, and especially the grizzly bear programs produced a huge number of periods, and a lot of them are behind paywalls too. You have to buy the.
I hate that. It drives me insane. And that money doesn't go to the researchers; it goes towards the journal.
Yeah,
right? And it's whatever. Anyways,
but now there's if you go to the website today, there's a nice balance. They've got a full-time science writer out there, Ben Williamson.
Gotcha.
Who's doing the more practitioner or public-oriented material, so that they can still be doing the peer-reviewed.
Good, that's awesome. That's important, right? Because what's the point of doing all the research if no one's going to read it, right? So it's important to make sure that it's palatable to people.
The other thing we should mention is the amazing GIS. It's 10 terabytes. And it includes all of the inventory information on the core area. In Hinton, Hinton, Jasper, Wilmore, and I think it's expanded some, and of course some of the other data is province wide.
Right.
But the information now on that region is just incredible.
It's phenomenal.
In the old days, remember the overlay maps?
Yep.
With you would be up to about a foot of overlays.
Keep overlaying different reference files on top of a photograph to try and
these are our salamanders. These are our grizzly bear movements. These are,
and now it's all on a computer, and that's part of what I do, right? It's fascinating, the power of this technology. I mean, you can open up a computer page and you have how old the stand is, what kind of composition to expect, what kind of moisture regime, nutrient regime, and what kind of habitat, what ecophase. It just goes on forever. But yeah, it's wild. It's huge. Allows for better management, right? Every time.
Another important development in the early 90s was the site classification. Which also feeds into this whole GIS, and having consistent ecosite classification, because before it was, you had your soils, you had your tree species, and so on, but it wasn't in a particular. So they produced a handbook,
right?
The ecosite.
Yeah. There's a few of them. Yeah, I use those all the time. I love the ecosite books. Yeah, they're the best thing. They help you understand so much. It's incredible. That's the one thing that people should definitely make sure that's part of their, forest industry, pack. They have it with them and understand it and know it, and it helps you out a lot.
So in a lot of cases like that, it was a matter of taking models that might have already been developed in the U.S. or Europe or Eastern Canada, and then applying them to our environment.
Right. And now we got our own.
And for the early water models, took a U.S. Forest Service model and adapted it. But then eventually they developed their own models, and Anderson's models these days are incredible, and they include projections of the climate impact.
Oh, nice. That's huge.
Yeah.
Well, we're well over an hour now. So
okay.
So you said the book's out when?
This week. We hope. It'll be arriving, the printed copies will be arriving in Hinton.
Okay.
And they'll begin to be distributed to the several hundred people who are on the distribution list.
Will people be able to buy it online
it will be available for sale for $40.
Okay.
Probably directly from the Institute. I don't know if they'll get it into bookstores.
Okay. So if you went to friresearch.com.
.ca.
.ca, okay. And you might come up there. Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome.
There's going to be available as a download.
Oh, okay. Perfect. So that'll be on the FRI Research.
Yeah.
.ca. So you can just literally, you don't have to buy it. It's just there.
Yeah.
Oh. Or you said you hope it'll be free, but you don't know.
I haven't confirmed that, but the other ebooks all are. So I
Gotcha.
assume it will be.
Awesome. Well, that's perfect. This is
It's
a great book.
almost 400 pages.
Yeah. Lots of information.
Including the appendices, about 350 pages of text.
Well, there's a lot of good information in there.
What, 160 photos, I think, and about 30 maps. I mean,
it's important to have photos to
Yeah.
keep us with short attention spans together, right? Like it definitely helps. It paints a picture too. Well, thanks a lot for coming on. This was awesome. Usually I just give out my email. If people want to talk to you, they can go through me, yourforestpodcast@gmail.com, reach out to Bob and ask questions. And yeah, I'll make sure to post it on my social media when the book is actually, when it's up on the website for people's download and stuff like that. So
yeah, I'm hopeful that'll all happen within the next couple of weeks.
awesome.
Yeah.
Perfect. Well, thanks a lot, man. This is great.
Well, it's always fun.